Hello everyone, my name is Anna Nemzer and this is my program Total Recalled, a joint production of TV Rain and the Russian Independent Media Archive.
Военный парад.
A military parade on the Red Square. We, Igor Kirillov and Anna Shatilova, will be covering it live.
Alongside us are our co-hosts Ekaterina Andreeva and Sergei Brylov.
This is the year 2005 and the broadcast of the Victory Day military parade on the Red Square. The names of the anchors you just saw are not very important, but the setup is. This cast is supposed to represent the generational connection of celebrating Victory Day on May 9th, because the hosts on the left are veterans of Soviet television and the ones on the right are the current generation. You might be wondering why this connection is not represented by regular people. This is what we will discuss today, and how Putin turned the Great Patriotic War, or the Eastern Front of World War II, into a tool in the arsenal of his dictatorship. We will learn how it is used now as one of the reasons for invading Ukraine. But first, another example of this connection.
Tavarish Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, in honor of the 60th anniversary of our great victory in the Great Patriotic War, the troops of the Moscow garrison are assembled. The commander of the parade, Army General Yefremov.
It's the word "товарищ." Post-Soviet Russia failed to come up with a new way of addressing people. Tavarish, or comrade, gained a communist and Soviet connotation, which are inseparable from it now in the modern Russian language. The Kommersant newspaper tried to get the Russian word for sir or mister to be the new way of addressing, but as you can imagine, that didn't stick. But even aside from addressing officials, regular people also didn't have any word to attract each other's attention, so they resorted to the plain man, woman, girl, young man. And in Russian, they sounded outlandish at the time. The press omitted vocatives entirely and just called people by their last name and occupation. But the topic of war was not allowed to go through the confusing transformation. It was sacred. The parade of 2005 was no different to that of 2015 or 1985. The narrative remained the same as 40 years ago. In 2002, one of the most famous Russian punk bands, Гражданская оборона, or Civil Defense, released an album of covers of Soviet songs. You just heard part of one. In Soviet times, this was a patriotic song, but this cover in the 2000s made it sound a lot different, like an implication of Soviet worldview returning. But in terms of the army and its terminology, it never left. Even through words seemed to be the easiest thing for them to change. Take a look at this.
And now, on the Red Square, military artillery units have been assembled. In our country, Artillery Day is celebrated on November 19th. This date commemorates the start of the Soviet counteroffensive near Stalingrad in 1942, when the artillery from the southwestern and Don fronts dealt significant damage to our enemy.
There are no words, but the melody you just heard is from a war song which originally contained the following lines. Artillerists, Stalin gave the order. This song will be sung again at a celebration of the KGB Agents' Day, or Cheki's Day, which we discussed in the first episode. This time, however, they changed the lyrics. Decided to remove Stalin. Well, that's an old trick. The national anthem of the Soviet Union in 1943 contained the following words: "And great Stalin illuminated our path. Stalin taught us to be faithful to the people." Then, in the 1970s, the lyrics got changed to "Great Lenin illuminated our path. To a righteous cause, he raised the people." And then, after the Soviet Union collapsed, after some changes, now the national anthem is just the same music, but there is no mention of neither Stalin nor Lenin anymore. But of course, a certain someone made an appearance in the new version of the lyrics. You are the only one in the world. You are the only one, the native land so kept by God. This has long been a common practice among the ruling elites, to make the meaning out of words, leave them hollow only in order to attribute them with whatever new meaning fits their goals. Let's try to figure out how this pertains to the topic of war. 4 days before the parade in 2005, Novaya Gazeta published a special issue where a large number of articles were unified by the Truth from the Trenches subtitle. All of them were dedicated to the truth about the toll that the Great Patriotic War took on the Soviet people and contained soldiers' diaries, veteran interviews, sociological analysis, and more. One of the interviewees was Alexander Yakovlev, one of the ideologists of Perestroika and a veteran of World War II. This was the subtitle of the article.
Our society is once again becoming one with an unpredictable past.
The author continues by saying that the Kremlin is radiating refalsification. The prefix re is used on purpose to underscore the fact that this is nothing new but a repetition of the main staples of Soviet historiography, which for most part was based on Stalin's view of history. In 2005, this was one of the first times that Putin's rule was compared to Stalin's, and it appeared harmless at the time. So what if we see these parallels as long as mass repressions don't become another parallel? And 2005 was a year when the word repression would have elicited scoffing from pretty much anyone. So the Great Patriotic War tended to be interpreted as Putin's stylistic error. He appeared to be liberal during the first terms, so this obsession with the past looked out of place. However, surprisingly enough, Alexander Yakovlev, a former Soviet government official, was ruthless about that topic even then.
Why are government officials doing all of this military propaganda today? They are all but amusing in scaring the enlightened parts of society, both domestically and abroad. I have a simple answer. To keep their own pants on. They want to stay in power for as long as humanly possible. In order to do that, they need to mobilize all the psychos who sometimes call themselves patriots. When, during the war, we would participate in attacks or defensive measures, none of us would even think to call ourselves patriots. We fought with sincerity and heart. We defended our families, our mothers, friends, our land, after all. The more power slips away from them, the more they cling to it.
This is what always shocks me when I work with the archives. All of this was already obvious all the way back then. The only thing that no one predicted was how far it was going to go. Another article in this special issue dealt with the topic of unanswered questions regarding the war and all these parades, such as, for example, why did the Soviet army switch so many generals right at the beginning of the war? What's especially disturbing is that questions like this one weren't just left unanswered indefinitely, but that in the late 80s, the conversations about repressions were initiated, but then quickly started being shut down in the 90s.
During the Great Terror in the 1930s, Stalin conducted a mass purge in the army. 4 marshals out of 5, almost all commanders of armies and corps, many generals and colonels were executed.
This, unfortunately, has a very simple explanation. Stalin's boundless self-infatuation mixed with boundless cowardice. His role in the Russian Civil War was minuscule compared to that of these marshals. Fearing potential rivalry with them, he just had them killed right before the bloodiest war in Russian history. This article touches on a terrifying topic, the means by which the USSR was fighting this war. The author limits his scope to the military high command, where Stalin executed most everyone who knew anything about strategy and tactics, and instead appointed people who at times were fully incompetent. There are many things that didn't make it into this article. Penal battalions made up of prisoners and how they were used as cannon fodder. or Orders 227 and 270, which mandated soldiers to kill their own if they showed signs of wanting to desert or surrender. Some things never change, unfortunately.
Никто не отступает, никто не сдается в плен.
No turning back, no surrendering. During your training, you will be given 2 grenades, which you must have on you when going into battle. Those that sign up but later decide that this is not the place for them, we label as deserters and execute them.
A totalitarian state doesn't cease being totalitarian when it's at war. Why would it? The article above closes with the following phrase.
Having won the great patriotic war, we lost Russia. We paid too high a price for this victory.
These words are spot on. For years, Vladimir Putin has been continuously explaining the USSR's role in the World War II in terms of the death toll. He views the soul-crushing numbers of deaths as the Soviet Union's biggest achievements.
У нас только под Сталинградом миллион.
We lost 1,100,000 people in Stalingrad alone. How many died in the UK? 400,000? Less than 500,000 of Americans died too.
Indeed, what self-respecting superpower would send so few of its people to their deaths? Truly, victory at any cost, especially if the cost is human lives. And so many of them could have been saved if Stalin's priority wasn't his own paranoia and he didn't kill talented military commanders. Or if anti-retreat forces that killed so many of their own people weren't created. The horrifying truth is that these were predetermined factors. The Soviet Union was built on the ruin brought on by civil war and ascribed little value to any single human being during the peacetime. So there was no reason why that would have changed during wartime. Wartime almost made it easier and more natural for the Soviet government to care so little about human lives. That is normal in war. This horrifying part of the Great Patriotic War has been concealed by General Secretary Brezhnev's pompous victory celebrations. He was the first ruler to introduce regular Victory Day parades and other celebrations because Stalin actually was terrified of the veterans and the truth about the war they could tell the rest of the Soviet people. So he repaid their sacrifice by silencing them. In the 80s, Brezhnev's grand decorations of Victory Day started coming undone, and the truth about the way victory was won started surfacing. People began talking about the inhuman ways in which the war was fought by the USSR. So in 2005, Putin began his efforts to seize these conversations gradually.
Дорогие друзья,
Dear friends, we never split the victory into ours and someone else's. We will always remember the help of the Allied forces, the United States of America, Great Britain, France, and other members of the anti-Hitler coalition, German and Italian anti-fascists. Today, we pay our respects to the courage of all Europeans who resisted Nazism. But we also know that the Soviet Union lost tens of millions of people in this war.
See what he did here? Sure, we don't deny the Allies' efforts, but no one should forget that this is our victory. This is perhaps the mildest of his speeches. He even listed the Allied countries in a rather friendly tone. Now look at the speech he gave in 2021. Not so friendly anymore. More like a talk that a thug gives to a victim before mugging.
давайте не забудем.
Let's not forget who took Berlin. The Americans? The Brits or the French? No, it was the Red Army. Forgotten already? It's not that difficult to remember.
16 years separate his recounting of the Allied countries and this "we took Berlin, so know your place" attitude. In that time, the memory of the war was being methodically usurped and erased. But this is nothing new. Every dictator rewrites history to his own advantage. What is interesting is that Putin began doing it even before he became a full dictator. Here is how it happened. I won't go into all the details because this is a massive conversation with many twists and turns, so I'm going to turn to this visit to Poland and Putin's press conference with the Polish Prime Minister.
Я приехал по приглашению премьер-министра для того, чтобы отдать дань уважения.
I came here at the Prime Minister's invitation to pay my respects to the memory of those who had lost their lives in World War II, and to commend the courage and heroism of the Polish people in the fight against Nazism. But if we are talking about an objective view of history, we must understand that it is not black and white. It is very nuanced, and a great deal of mistakes was made by everyone.
Sounds normal, right? History is not black and white and all that. But did you hear the tone of his voice? It's like he's responding to an insult. But it only got worse from here.
If one party aims to only pick the plums out of a decaying cake, leaving the spoiled parts for the other party, no good will come of it.
Not a common metaphor by any standard, but the meaning behind it is clear. Who does everyone want to give them all to? Russia. Yet again, the tone of his is even more important than what's he saying. This message was meant for two sets of ears. The domestic audience to whom he was saying, look, they're downplaying our historical importance, and the international audience to whom he was saying, don't you dare downplay our historical importance. What did he consider a downplaying of Russia's historical importance? The Polish Prime Minister said that while the Soviet army freed Poland from the Nazis, they couldn't give Poland freedom because the Soviet army itself wasn't free. This comment on the totalitarian nature of Soviet rule was unacceptable. And right after that, Putin says, mind you, that the topic of war must be depoliticized or else.
If we don't depoliticize history, we will be like doctors who purposely infect people to make money off of treating them. Why should we infect our people with false information and then speculate about it as part of our domestic policy?
It's unbelievable that he would even say that. It was like a round of self-incrimination. For this is exactly what he began doing methodically, infecting the Russian people with false information about World War II. But he didn't present like a real conception of history or even his own full view of it. He just injected a mist of various impressionistic terms like the valor of Russian military, the nation's greatness, resentment, the world's forgetting that Russia saved it from Hitler, and such. Of course, without a complete historical picture, Putin's enterprise runs into roadblocks. But exactly because of the lack of completeness, these roadblocks are passed with ease. In 2010, the State Duma adopted the statement on the Katyn tragedy and its victims. Essentially, there was nothing to adopt. The fact that the NKVD, predecessor of the KGB, was responsible for the Katyn massacre has been proven a long time ago. Mikhail Gorbachev recognized it back in 1990. The State Duma still adopts the statement with a majority vote. The only one opposed were the representatives of the Communist Party, of course. Then President Dmitry Medvedev directly blamed Stalin and the NKVD. It would seem that something like that would throw a wrench into the development of the official state doctrine of history, which denies any and all wrongdoing on the USSR part. But Putin's concept of history is not coherent, and he finds a way to work all of it into his view. He doesn't absolve the Soviet Union, but finds excuses.
Оказывается, в 2020 году военные операции.
As it turns out, in 1920, the military operation, the Soviet-Polish War or the Soviet-Polish armed conflict, was led personally by Stalin. I didn't even know that. But as we know, the Red Army lost that war. Many Red Army soldiers were taken captive. According to the latest data, 32,000 of them died of hunger and sickness while in captivity in Poland. I suppose, and this is my personal opinion, that Stalin felt personally responsible for this tragedy, so he committed the Katyn massacre driven by revenge.
So revenge is bad, of course, but look what they did to our boys. This fit right in the midst of impressionistic terms that he passed as the official doctrine of history. The USSR and its leader are not to blame, but if they are, that's not a problem. Everything can be explained away. In 2014, TV Rain reposts a poll on its social media that was created by the Echo Moskvy radio station and the writer Astafyev. One question: should Leningrad have been given up to avoid the siege and save hundreds of thousands of lives? This was the perfect excuse for Putin's watchdogs to go after TV Rain, the only independent TV channel at the time that was covering the Maidan in Ukraine and protests in Russia. TV Rain was taken off the air and many advertising accounts left the channel. Watch this clip from about a year ago. He still hasn't let it go.
Речь шла просто о сохранении государственности.
It was about preserving the sovereignty of the state. It was about saving the ethnos from extinction, of Eastern Europeans, of Russians, and Ukrainians, by the way. This is what it was about. And when I hear that it might have been a good idea to give up Leningrad, I want to ask these people, are you stupid or what? None of you would have been alive today if that happened. That's what I'm talking about.
The mist of impressionistic terms must not be disturbed with questions about the methods that were used to fight this war. Even if the veterans of said war are asking the same questions, it can't be disturbed with questions about the number of Soviet people who died at the hands of their own. Besides, everyone lost count after the Great Terror of the 1930s. Why? Because any of these questions undermining the totalitarianism of the USSR and its way of fighting the war are capable of ruining the only thing that people think puts him above everyone else on the global arena: USSR's role in achieving victory in World War II. Moreover, if modern Russia were to be disconnected from the USSR, then what will Putin have to show for himself? The Chechen wars, that is, 2 wars against your own citizens. Would have been hard to sell that as a point of pride, especially seeing how the federal government essentially lost both wars. In 2020, the year of 75th anniversary of the victory, the building of the Cathedral of the Russian Armed Forces is nearing completion. At first, the enlightened parts of Russian society were having fun with it. But we need to dig deeper. There is a good deal of magical thinking going on here. Some architectural aspects are meant to be symbolic of the Great Patriotic War. For example, the drum's diameter is 19.45 meters, like the year of the victory. The diameter of the dome is 22.43 meters at 22:42 at night on May 8th, 1945, Nazi Germany capitulated. The height of the belfry is 75 meters. It's the anniversary, and the list goes on. But the most important aspects of all of it is this obsession with magical numbers, which is quite pagan, by the way. This is quintessential for Putin's method of ruling in general. No meanings, no essences. Christianity could hardly be crossed with militarism, but who cares? The only things that exist are a cargo cult and a hollow shapes waiting to be stuffed with whatever meaning Putin needs.
And now regarding our relations with Ukraine. I disagree with you when you said that if we had been separated, we would not have won the war. We would have won anyway, because we are the country of victors.
This is the same magical thinking. It's a completely meaningless mantra that forms some other reality. We will be victorious because we are victors. There was a similar Soviet slogan that read, "Marx's teaching is omnipotent because it's true." Same kind of simulacra. He made his speech on May 9th on 2014, 2 months after the annexion of Crimea. At the same time, Mariupol, an eastern Ukrainian city that was destroyed later in 2022, was already being bombed, and some men dressed in black stormed the city hall. This is the footage of the Mariupol's takeover by the Donetsk People's Republic separatists, heavily backed by Russia. So in this context, let me try to decipher Putin's mantra. Russia came out as the victor in its war with Hitler because Russia is the country of victors. But the country wasn't Russia back then, but the Soviet Union, which included Ukraine. So it is Soviet land or Russian land, but Putin's words about how we would have won with or without Ukraine separates it from the Soviet Union, but somehow makes it Russian. Then so Russia has every right to take it back. Or just take it without the word back. The same kind of logic, if it can be called that, was used when invading Ukraine in 2022. Russia will save Ukrainians from Nazis, but Ukrainians are the Nazis in question. What not to understand? It turned out to be a good strategy to just keep developing this mist of impressionistic terms about the old war so that it can serve as this justification for the new war, one that Russia will start this time. The war itself will put things in their right place and justify the faulty logic once it's underway. The reason for what is not important. What's important is the desire to go to war. It's more important than facts, logic, or human lives, all for the pleasure of the thug dictator. This will be our entry into Putin's playbook. Weaponize the war that left a mark on every single family in your country. The country of victors that killed thousands of its own soldiers in Afghanistan and made thousands more disabled. That's not counting the Afghans themselves. The country of victors that fought itself in Chechnya, killing hundreds of thousands of civilians, its own civilians. The country of victors that invaded Ukraine with the intention of taking over Kyiv in 3 days. The country of victors that tortured and raped people in Bucha, stealing toilet bowls from their raid houses. Putin has been convincing Russia that its past is unpredictable and its future is something special, like the military operation. Thank you all for watching. This has been Total Recall, the program that I've developed in collaboration with TV Rain and the Russian Independent Media Archive. We'll see each other in a week. Stay on TV Rain. Thank you.